You don't need a holiday to show someone you care. 1-800-Flowers marches on all year round. Send clovers for St. Patrick's Day, red, white, and blue roses for Liberty Week, or maybe even some in replacement for a Hug a Newsman Day. Get 15% off your purchase when you go to the FBIApodcast.com webpage and click our 1-800-Flowers.com coupon link at the bottom of the page, or go to 1-800-Flowers.com and enter the code FBIAPodcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Football is America with Ron and Kyle. I'm Ron.
I'm Kyle. Today we have with us Levi, editor of Silver and Black Pride, which is the SB Nation Raiders fan page. We are very excited to have him here today to discuss the Raiders with us. Levi, thank you for making the time. I appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to be here.
All right, Levi, first I want to ask you, how long have you been a fan of the Raiders?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Going back to the early 80s, been following the Raiders right around their final Super Bowl right around then. And
Okay.
I've been covering them since early 2008.
And what was it, would you say, kind of drove you to get into a professional aspect of covering the team? Just pure fanaticism, desire for more information, or, need to be active in the community, or something else? I mean, what was the driving force for you?
Well, I've always been kind of led by my passions, and my passion, for quite a long time, as early 80s or whatnot, if you will, has been, sports and the teams that I follow. And it just kind of became one of those things where I had ideas. You have ideas, and I'm the type of person who wanted to flesh those ideas out and present them. So I just started writing. I found a site that had a guy who owned it, and I joined him and started writing, covering the team that way. And it's just one of those things you stick with, and if you have a good grasp of the English language and and a good knowledge of the sport you're covering, or if you will, then you can do this.
You go back pretty far, much further than most of the people we've had on the show, actually. And we just kind of want to know, what is the strongest memory, good or bad, that you've had with being a writer, as a fan, and anything like that?
Well, the strongest memory for me would be their run to the Super Bowl in 2002. I mean, that was quite a roller coaster season for those who remember. They started out strong. They won 4 straight to begin the season, and then they lost 4 or 5 straight in a row there. So it was like you started thinking, well, everything where they started out looking like they really were going to be something special. Then just like, oh, same old Raiders. And then after that losing streak, they picked it back up and then just ran out the rest of the season. And Rich Gannon had his MVP season, and they just kind of mowed everybody over all the way to the Super Bowl. And then it was like something out of a movie where you're meeting up against the head coach that you just traded the year before for a first round pick, and he knows your playbook, and the center goes off to Tijuana, goes off his meds, and it just becomes this weird acid trip or something. That definitely, that season and that Super Bowl was certainly the most lasting, memory for me.
Yeah, one of the jokes I make quite a few times is that even when the Raiders were winning and made themselves a Super Bowl, they still figured out a way to make it look bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with the way that whole thing ended, it's almost like people perceive it as, they were worse off for making it to the Super Bowl and then just doing a face plant than if they'd never even been there in the first place. They're like, just became like a laughing stock at that point. And it's kind of a weird juxtaposition because they were so dominant. They were such a juggernaut offensively, and that usually affects the defense as well. They were so dominant heading into that Super Bowl that you couldn't have foreseen, that happening. It's just so strange.
Now, speaking of successes and maybe less successes, 3-13 season, wins against the Chiefs, the 49ers, and the Bills. Can you say this season was a success in any way? Perhaps not in terms of schedule, but, what did you figure anything out as a team, or was there, what is a positive to be drawn from this year?
Well, I mean, I point straight to Khalil Mack as a positive. I mean, that guy, he is a building block, both literally and figuratively, with this team. He was the obvious pick. He's the pick that had to be made at that pick. There's not a person who knows anything about football that wouldn't have picked Khalil Mack at that spot. So at that point, it just becomes, they got lucky in essence, because you can have these can't miss dynamite picks like Aaron Curry when he was coming out, and Robert Gallery for the Raiders when he came out offensive tackle, that still don't end up panning out. But Khalil Mack he looks like an all-pro guy and somebody you can build a defense around. And when you bring in guys like that, when you have guys like that, when you go from a team what they had last year, the one thing that they have now, a guy like Derek Carr, for instance, is like, okay, well, free agents are like, all right, well, now they're another step in the rebuilding process, and maybe I wouldn't completely turn my nose up at the idea of going there. And maybe they're not a contender right now, but they have the looks of a team that could be a contender, within a couple of years. So that's one thing you can say. You don't get that feeling that the only reason anybody would come to this team is if they get paid a lot, or they've already won their Super Bowls and they just want to have a couple more years on a team in the NFL that build up their stats or whatever the case may be. You actually feel like there's a chance that there are some players that will want to come and be a part of what's the building that's happening.
Now, and also let's take into consideration the Raiders easily had the hardest schedule in the entire league last year, a ridiculous amount of playoff caliber teams that the Raiders had to go up against, and to come out with 3 wins with the hardships in terms of talent and cap and all the various other things that the Raiders had to deal with. 3-13 is really not bad, at least in my mind. I remember watching that first victory against the Chiefs, and that was probably about as excited as I got to watch a game not for my team all year. That was a fantastic, just great emotional victory. It was a wonderful game to watch, very exciting. So were the fans at least a little understanding, hey, we got a hard schedule and the wins we have are well earned? Was there at least that tolerance there?
Well, I guess if you look at the definition of the word fan, I mean, most of the fans that I see will, they convince themselves one way or another that, there's a reason for all this, that is outside of, something that's going to give them hope that come next season, these problems are going to be in the past. The only reason that they only won 3 games is because they had the toughest schedule in the NFL. I mean, if I were to play devil's advocate, which I tend to do from time to time, I would say that even in the games where they weren't playing definite, solid, playoff level teams, they still weren't up to that level. So, I mean, maybe some of the games would have been a little closer, but early in that 10-game losing streak, there were very few games where you got the feeling that they were close. There was one game where, that week 6, I take that back. There were 2 games, and there was week 3, in New England, where they had what they thought to be a touchdown by Darren McFadden that got called back because of the kind of questionable holding penalty, and then that interception. If they had made the touchdown, they would have tied the game, but they didn't, and they lost it. And then 2 weeks later, after the bye week, when they played the Chargers, or 3 weeks later rather, when they played the Chargers, Derek Carr, it was the first game with Tony Sparano as the head coach. Derek Carr threw 4 touchdown passes, and they were leading in the final minutes, and then the defense gave it up to lose it. So there were those two games right there. They were really in it, and they looked like, you know, a couple things go their way, and they could put some wins together. But even at the end of the season, those final 6 games where they won 3, they were 3-3. If you look at the games they lost, well, first of all, the games they won were all at home. They're all home games. So, you know, they're winning on pure inspiration at this point. And then but if you look at the road games, like after their first win, they lost 52-0 in St. Louis. I mean, that's not an accident. And then, you know, so it's kind of, I'm not quite as much of I'm not one of the people who says, well, they had the tough schedule, so they kind of forget it. I've never really been big into that whole idea. And if you want to talk about toughest schedule, they have another one of the top, I think they're top 5 in the toughest schedule next season as well. So it doesn't get much easier.
Well, don't feel bad about getting the whole 50 burger thrown up on you. I'm a Bears fan, and I got to watch back-to-back games up like that. So I know how you feel there, and so you don't get discouraged by that. And that seemed to be kind of the growing thing with the fans was, you know, they lost 52-0 to St. Louis, and St. Louis isn't even all that good. Well, you know, the Raiders, they at least look like they're going to compete in most games. It was that way at least for the most part last year, and maybe the second half of the previous year. And you have a lot of positives, especially with Derek Carr and Murray there running the football. And I'm just, that's kind of the reason we've been so high on them. So
I will say that this went exactly the opposite of what I expected. I came into the interview going, yeah, Raiders, man, all right. And then you were like, absolutely no. Here are some facts for you, Kyle. And I'm like, wow. All right. I was straight up giving this the Miracle on Ice rose-colored glasses. Maybe we need to dial it back. So,
well, I mean, that's also me. That's also me. I'm not people tell me I need to have more faith, and my response is always, I'm not in the faith business. Because I'm more of a proof is in the pudding type of guy. So, you know, take that for what it's worth.
Nothing wrong there. So it was very difficult for me to write this interview because so many of these subjects are intertwined. You already talked, you had a sentence in there about free agency. And so much of this just kind of is hand in hand. We know that, Al Davis had some great years. We know he was an innovator and the league would be nowhere near the same without him. But you could easily say that for the last 5 to 10 years of his involvement, the team was not doing so good. Cap hell, drafting the fastest guy available when it really didn't make sense, and a guy like a Darius Hayward-Bay, and just not giving a great situation. And this is what Reggie McKenzie inherits. So, it took some time, and we're only just now seeing the team kind of claw their way out. You're getting out of cap hell. You've got a ridiculous amount of money right now. I think it's second most cap space at $55 million. And we're only just now getting to the point where Reggie McKenzie is able to start fresh, but he's already got a couple seasons under his belt. So what happens to him going forward? Does he get, in any sense, a pass on the past few years for the fact that he inherited a bad situation, or is it just, no, you didn't get the wins and he's on the hot seat?
Oh, he's on the hot seat. I don't think that you can completely give him a pass, mainly because, sure, he was in a difficult situation. There's no doubt about that. And there were some growing pains that were going to happen. You can see when you talk to Mark Davis that there's frustration on his part. He keeps saying that he at least needs to see progress. I mean, that could be slightly incremental progress, but we haven't seen a lot of it. You know what I mean? It's you had 2 4-win seasons, and each off season it seems like they're starting over all over again. And what you expect to see is you expected to see an instant start to a rebuild. And then after 2 seasons, suddenly they're saying things like, well, that was the deconstruction years. It's like, well, you weren't saying that before. No one was saying, well, we're going to deconstruct this team over the next 2 years, so be patient. Well, they can't say that, obviously, right? So, but the problem is, I don't think that was the plan initially. They're saying that now because it's like, that's what you have to tell the fans, like, just be a little bit more patient. We're going to keep trying to do this thing. And Reggie gets a lot of credit for instance, for cutting away a lot of big salaries. Well, not to be too negative about it, but pretty much anyone could do that. Just look at, say, who's paid the most? We'll cut that guy. Well, what you need to do is figure out how you can work it to where you can try and hold on to some of these guys, maybe restructures or extensions or something like that. But it seemed there was like a rigidity that was happening to where it was, let's cut these guys because they get paid so much, and instantly just flip over to, we're the Green Bay Packers. So many times they say with the Green Bay model, but we're the Green Bay Packers. We won't pay too much for anybody. We won't give them a bunch of guaranteed money. We won't give them big signing bonuses, so we're not tied up with dead money later on. I was like, well, that's great. That's great in theory, but who's going to want to come to the Raiders if they're not getting any guaranteed money or any signing bonuses, which those prorated signing bonuses act as security down the road, so they're less likely to be cut. And what you end up with is this. What you end up with is a team that loses its best players every offseason and doesn't have the firepower and doesn't offer the amount of the kind of salaries that would tempt any good free agents to come in. And building through the draft it takes a long time. In the meantime, you have to field a competitive team, and they just haven't quite been able to do that. So,
okay. That's a very fair assessment. As you had said, when you have to deconstruct, you have to reconstruct, you have to go through all these, neat little growing pains. Something I remember seeing an article, forget where, something to the effect of more NFL players said than, for the Raiders, more than any other team. If I'm playing there, I'm getting double than anywhere else as a free agent. Just as you said, the environment, the way the contracts are structured. And it's one thing to model yourself after Green Bay, but until you've gotten Aaron Rodgers, it's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
so you have a Brett Favre who was immediately replaced by Aaron Rodgers, and you don't skip a beat, and you always have constant success, and you're the kind of team that players want to come to because they feel like they have a chance to win there. Yes.
Well, now that you've got a quarterback in Derek Carr who looks like he could be potential franchise quarterback. We'll see. Year one is always interesting. It doesn't necessarily translate to year two, but there's definitely promise. And as you said, Khalil Mack is a wrecking ball. That guy is crazy fun to watch and ridiculous quarterback pressures. So now that we're seeing some of the cornerbacks or, cornerstones in place, will that attract more players in free agency, make Oakland seem, more desirable and a little more accessible for people to go to not just cash out after they won a Super Bowl, but actually potentially build towards the future now?
I think somewhat, yeah. I touched upon that earlier, that yes, they're in a better place than they were this time last off season as far as, being an attractive team. And they're doing, what they can, little things like they just remade the entire, their headquarters facility, expanded the weight room and put in all new carpets and things like that, so that when free agents come to visit, they say they won't be looking at like a rundown old facility. They'll see a state-of-the-art facility, and maybe, kind of the way that the University of Oregon attracts their recruits. They come in, they see the absolute best that a college could ever possibly put together, and they're like, wow, I want to go to college here because I know that I'm going to get the finest equipment, the finest facilities, the finest, staff and everything like that. And so they're doing what they can to, and some of that has to do with the personnel that's in place, that you feel like they have some good young building blocks that in a couple of years there's a potential that, so they can tell people, we got these guys, all we need is you. We add you to this, and we're a competitor. In a couple of years, we, add you and a couple other guys. The next thing you know, we go from 3-13 to 13-3. And it's happened before. You've seen teams do that. So yeah, in a matter of speaking, but there's one of those things that comes into play, and that's how you take care of your own free agents. And I think that's just as important. They come to a team and then they say, well, they give me this deal now, but they're the type of team that's known to they a year or two from now they're going to be like, well, we don't like that deal anymore, and since we didn't offer you a lot of money on the prorated money or guaranteed money or anything like that, then we can let you go free and clear. Or how they treat their original players, if they let them go like they did Jared Valdir last year, or what it looks like they could be doing with Stefan Wisniewski this coming year. It's like, do you hold on to the pieces that were homegrown and the guys that actually still want to be there and build this thing the way that it should be built? Now, all those things come into play.
Right. You just brought up a couple of the players right there that I had actually, in the email that I had sent you, had kind of had questions about. More recently, there's two things that happened personnel-wise that I had maybe some questions that maybe you could give some insight into. One was being the re-signing of Charles Woodson, who is as old as football itself at this point, and two, the release of Tyvon Branch, who had played very, very well, but then over the last couple of years, he's had some injury issues. Now, is that something where they think that he cannot overcome, and that is why he was let go, or was it just the fact that his cap money was just too high?
That is a really good question, because it was a question I posed coming into the off season. I posed it as a question because I don't have an easy answer to it. You basically, if you look at it on the face, you're like, well, we're about to pay a guy $9.6 million. Well, he's about to represent a salary cap hit of $9.6 million, which is by far on the current roster the highest cap hit, by like a good $3 million going into next season. And you're paying for a guy who has played 3 full games in the last 2 seasons because he's broken things. Then again, you have a ton of money right now, around $56 million, and it looks to be you look to add another $10 million once the expected cuts of Matt Schaub and Laura Woodley come down. So we're talking potentially $66 million to spend, and it's not that easy to spend that kind of money, especially when you're not a GM that's prone to putting big numbers on things like that. He leaves behind $6.7 million in dead money. So you're only saving $3 million, and he's still somewhat young, but there's the injury thing. So there's like so many different ways. It's just, they didn't have to cut him, but I think you look at it just on the face of it, and you say, well, this is real money, and we don't want to put forth the risk of him getting injured again. I don't know. It's a tough decision. They could have held on to him, and it still wouldn't have been a bad decision, and I don't necessarily blame them for cutting him either.
The next thing I have is Jack Del Rio, hired as head coach. What is the fan perspective of it? I remember watching Jack Del Rio coach the Jaguars, and then his working for the Broncos has been, very kind of, it just kind of seemed like he was handed a lot, I guess is the best way to put it. Mm-hmm. He goes into a situation where you have a staple with Peyton Manning coming in there. The defense wasn't exactly always top tier over there, and all of a sudden now he's been given, kind of handed the keys to a brand new car, and my personal feeling was, what had he done that constituted him being able to get that job? It just didn't seem like he had shown me anything super special.
No, he's handed the keys to a brand new car. Is a good play on work there with Derek Carr. Anyway, let's talk about the Denver thing first.
That's giving Ron entirely too much credit right there. There is 0% chance that was planned out.
It was not, but thank you for trying. I appreciate it. I don't ever get the jokes, and when I do, normally it's awful.
There's a moment of awkward silence, and then I just go, exactly. You proud of what you did?
Judging by the crickets that we just heard when I said that, I definitely think that was not intentional. But anyway.
Well, yeah, no, what you said was funny, and then I'm just like, wait a minute. Is he implying Ron made a joke? Oh, no way am I going to let this one stand. There is justice in my country, and I will make sure that it happens.
So anyways, as far as the Broncos thing, First of all, I think yes, absolutely, it was the right hire, and it was pretty much. I was all for Del Rio being hired 3 years ago when he was first fired from the Jaguars, because it was a perfect situation. You needed what I felt you needed, experience at the head coaching position on such a team. But I agree that it wasn't the right time for the Raiders, and it wasn't the right time for Jack Del Rio, because you don't want to put him in a no-win situation. But as far as what he did with the Broncos, if you look at, he took over for Dennis Allen. I guess all of that is rather ironic in some way. He took over for Dennis Allen in Denver, and the defense immediately improved quite a bit in his first season in Denver. But you can't really judge him based on what he does as a defensive coordinator. I mean, the reason he was hired as the head coach of the Raiders is because of what he did as a head coach with the Jaguars. And he did the same thing when he came in as head coach. He brought the team back to relevancy. And when he left, after he left, the team just tanked and has never recovered. And he came in and he brought in a few coaches that, and you could see that, something I had written about even before he was hired, is that he's kind of the anti-Dennis Allen, which is just what this team needs. He has experience and he has respect across the league among coaches, former coaches and former players. And you're seeing this. Some of his former coaches really want to join him. He brought in Mike Tyson, it's a great hire. Bill Musgrave, who, jury's still out exactly on how great of a hire he will be, but he wanted to work with his old head coach again, so that says something about Del Rio. And then you have guys like Trevor Knight in Denver saying, "I'll go wherever Jack Del Rio goes," and he's done that in his career. He was with him in Jacksonville, followed him to Denver, and now he wants to come to the Raiders to follow him as well. So he's very well liked. He has a commanding presence. He's well respected, and I think that means a lot. And then you add the fact that he's from Oakland, essentially. Yeah, Hayward, which is right up the road. And he grew up a Raiders fan. His parents are still season ticket holders, Raiders season ticket holders. So he's basically, not even basically, he said it himself, he's taking his dream job.
And doesn't his brother work security or something like that for the team as well? I mean, that was something I believe I had read. His brother's involved in the security at the stadium.
What does this mean for the team? Does the hiring of Jack Del Rio improve the team so much that we're looking at 4 more wins? Or we're looking at 6 more wins? Like, what kind of influence does he bring to improve this team? Because I watched a lot of him when he was with Jacksonville, and I know that that whole parting there was kind of weird and just really out of the ordinary. So we can't really judge his firing on anything, to be honest, because it was just strange. But there's a lot of rumor, and I'm playing a little devil's advocate myself here. There's a lot of talk that, yes, he stepped into a defense and he instantly made it better, but who was the defensive coordinator before him?
Dennis Allen.
And so how do we know that what he got there in Denver wasn't the product of what Dennis Allen had put together and then moved on to, and not him just dropping into something great?
Well, that's an eternal question. I mean, it's kind of it's the Tony Dungy, John Gruden thing, right? Did John Gruden really lead that team to the Super Bowl? Or he just step in and take over the team that Tony Dungy built? As far as a coordinator is concerned, I don't think you can put that on the former defensive coordinator, especially considering Dennis Allen was only there for 1 season. So you can't really put the fact that Del Rio was handed a great defense. I would say it's closer to what you said before about him being handed Peyton Manning. And, as we know, when you got a fantastic offense, it helps the defense because opposing offense is always playing from behind. They have to put the ball in the air more often, so those things kind of trickle down. It's the reason why I always pick Denver since Peyton Manning's been there, as my defensive special team on my fantasy team, because I know that wherever Peyton Manning is going to make the defense look better. And it tends to work out pretty well. But, like I said, I really think you have to judge him based more on what his long tenure as as a head coach. It's the same thing. I mean, we're talking about, like John Fox when he came to Denver, or Andy Reid when he came to Kansas City. He immediately brings a presence that not only put the players trust in him, that they're playing, or like this guy has done this. Maybe he hasn't won a Super Bowl or anything, but we feel comfortable with him. And, when you're talking about the free agents that we're talking about the facilities, well, having a head coach in there, would you rather, if you were sitting across the table from Dennis Allen or sitting across the table from Jack Del Rio, who would you be more likely to sign that piece of paper to play for?
That's not exactly a, thinker right there.
No. I mean, it isn't. You're just like, well, I trust this guy is going to lead us in the right direction and do what has to be done and done the right way, as opposed to this guy. I mean, Dennis Allen was not well liked or well respected, and I say that not just his teammates and everything. I don't think he was very well liked or respected among the media as well. So,
all right, fantastic. It's kind of easy to see that with Dennis Allen, that like even from the outside looking in, you look at that and go, no, you're not going to be around long. Don't get comfy.
Yeah.
Rent, don't buy. So, all right, shifting gears. Looking ahead at the draft, top 5 draft pick, very, very good place to be. And especially with having a quarterback and a pass rusher already kind of locked up. So those are 2 of the hardest spots to fill, and they're filled. Now you can always have more pass rush, but what now comes up as the biggest position of need?
Well, to bounce off what you said about a pass rusher, yes, they still need a pass rusher because Khalil Mack is a pass rusher, but he's an outside linebacker. They need a pass rusher.
Right, and you need
end spot. Something
absolutely.
that they've, I would say their top 2 needs, and I think I almost have to throw in the third one now that it looks like Nick Roach is definitely not coming back. So we have, you have defensive end, middle linebacker, and wide receiver, not necessarily in that order. Wide receiver and defensive end in particular are 2 positions that they have not put an emphasis on for at all, really with this, certainly with the new regime. And before, it was just simply mishandled. In the years previous, the wide receiver position was so, they drafted Darius Hayward-Bay. They traded for Randy Moss. They signed Javon Walker to a gigantic contract. It's just really mishandling the wide receiver position. And then the new regime, when it comes to receivers and defensive ends, they just haven't bothered to even look at them in the draft until the 5th round or later. And those are 2 key positions that are just, this team is desperate. The last time they had a 1,000-yard receiver was 2005, and that was Randy Moss for 1 season before he turned into Randy Moss and needed to be traded away.
Yeah, we love ripping on him.
It's low-hanging fruit, to be certain.
Yeah, absolutely. And the defensive end position, they've in every draft, the first draft they spent a 5th round pick, a 5th round pick on a raw player who'd only really played great for like 1 season of Division I football, being Jack Crawford, and then eventually cut him. And then the other 2 drafts, they waited till the 7th round, and both of those players have been cut from the team. So it's just like, do they think that defensive end is just not an important position, or is it really they're just so focused on going for best player available whenever their pick comes up that they just neglect it, and they're like, oh crap, we're almost through the entire draft, we should probably grab a defensive end. And so I think that's really where they have to go. It has to be either, I think with that top pick, it probably needs to be wide receiver, because you have guys like Amari Cooper and Kevin White up there, and they should probably be one of those guys, or perhaps defensive end if it works out that way. And then middle linebacker maybe in free agency or later in the draft. But those are the 3 positions I would say that. And there's just so many. Offensive guard's another one. Right guard, they had Austin Howard. They brought him in. He was their number 1. He was their top free agent picked up last year, and then he was terrible at guard, and they're going to move him back to tackle, so they have nobody for the right guard position either. Some of this is going to be worked out in free agency, and so I'll have a better idea of how desperate they are at certain positions come the draft time. But those positions, I think, are in the most need.
Okay. And is there anybody that the fans want, or anything you're seeing on the website, anybody's name being tossed around, or even the possibility of trading down for more picks? Anything you can share with us regarding fan opinion?
Well, I would say the player that everyone wants the most is Leonard Williams. And I would say that goes for Raiders fans. He was a Raider fan growing up, so of course they're all into that. And most teams have Leonard Williams at the top of the draft board.
I was going to say we've heard just about every team we've interviewed have said Leonard Williams.
Yeah.
At the top of the draft board.
So the odds of him actually being there at 4 are pretty astronomical. So outside of that possibility, it's mostly Amari Cooper. You hear the most. And then you have some people, that are more along the lines of they want Randy Gregory or Shane Ray or one of those defensive ends. And then of course there are some who want Kevin White over Amari Cooper. So,
and I have to be under the assumption that if somebody comes up with a deal similar to like what we saw in the Sammy Watkins trade, to take a couple steps back and still be in the top 10, top 15, that's hard to pass up for an extra first rounder or two.
Yeah, definitely. I left that out. There are definitely a lot of people who would like to trade back. Most of them, most of the people want to trade back. They're of the mind that the player that they want is still going to be there when they trade back. So, and you can't really, there's no way to guarantee, trade back 3 spots and then Amari Cooper and Kevin White go in the 2 spots before them, and then they're like, oh crap, the guy we wanted
trade back again.
Exactly.
Keep going.
So trading back is always an attractive idea because you think, oh, we can get more picks, but then you run the risk that the guy that you wanted is not going to be there once your pick comes up. So.
We're talking draft, and I know that one of the draft picks you guys had last year was real big with a number of people that I've talked to that are Raiders fans, and that was Latavius Murray. What are your thoughts on him, and is that kind of going to be, the feature guy going forward?
Well, he was a 2013 pick, but he was injured through his entire rookie season, so technically, he was not picked last year, but he was a 6th round pick, and yes, very high on him. I'm pretty high on him as well. I had actually wrote an article like probably 2 weeks before he started handing the ball again, and that he had been completely phased out of the offense. Not in the offense, the entire everything, because the early part of the season he was getting a few carries here and there, and he was being used as a kick returner. But then there was like a 4 or 5 week span where he got nothing. He was healthy, and he was just standing on the sideline while the Raiders were the worst rushing team in the NFL. And that made no sense to me. I was just like, how can you? I was not by any means saying that Latavius Murray, he's the answer. I was just saying that you got to find that answer. If you have these guys on the team and these guys are not working, unequivocally not working, you try this guy. And once they did, boom, he just exploded. And I was like, well, I could not have foreseen that, but hate to say I told you so, So yeah, he looks really good. He's a big guy. He's an instinctive runner, and he can mow some guys down when he gets into them. His first 2 runs were like he had a 14-yard run and a 23-yard run, which in his first run he had outgained anything that Darren McFadden had done in that game, and I think it was longer than any run Darren McFadden had all season. I have to double check that, but
just leaves you going, see? You see?
Yeah, exactly. And then he had that 23-yard run, and it was like he outgained the entire team.
Yeah, I had read your article on Latavius Murray, actually. I kind of wanted to softball one in there for you.
Yeah.
Because I know you were kind of high on the guy earlier in the year, because I remember when I was looking for some more about this guy, I was just looking at I was like, who is this guy? And I'm sorry, I did mess up the year that he was drafted. I for some reason still considered for some reason in my mind this year, last year. So
like I said, he was injured his entire rookie season, so it's an understandable thought that he was a rookie last year.
Right. And I remember sitting around going, man, I have no idea who this guy is. And I was like, I'm going to do a search on it. And like the first thing I found was one of your articles, and I was like, well, I'm going to read this right now. And
you know how it is on TV. They act like, well, of course we broadcasters at NBC or CBS know who Latavius Murray is. And I'm like, you have no idea who this guy is, but you sure sound convincing. And now we're going, should we know exactly who this is? They seem pretty confident, and he's looking real good. It was very intimidating at that moment.
When he was drafted, he drew comparisons to Darren McFadden, which was like, in my mind, I was like, dude, that's not a good thing. Because I mean, Darren McFadden, I've never been a fan of Darren McFadden, not from the beginning. I mean, you could go back to when he was drafted, and before he was drafted, I was saying, do not draft this guy. I was adamant about it. It just like first of all, at the time they had Michael Bush. That was the main thrust of my argument. Is like, why, when you have this Michael Bush, who was, if you remember correct, in college, he was a Heisman front runner until he blew out he had that fracture in his leg, and they drafted him a couple years before, and they waited for him to heal, and then he healed, and he was like, okay, now their time that they put into this guy's going to pay off, and then they go and draft Darren McFadden. But anyway, what Latavius Murray had in common with him was simply his height and his running style. But what he didn't have in common with him was just his power. He was bulkier. You could put their legs side by side. Darren McFadden is notorious for having the scrawniest legs of any running back in the NFL. I guess it was kind of cruel. I did a screenshot of a picture I took of Darren McFadden, of just his legs, right next to Maurice Jones-Drew's legs, and it was comical. It looked like I had doctored both pictures in some way that I assure you I did not.
Well, that's kind of how MJD looks anyway. I mean, he's
got these tree trunks and
nobody is accusing MJD of skipping leg day. That is never going to happen ever.
He probably rolls into the gym and goes, you know what, guys, I got this, and just squats his 575 pounds and then rolls out.
Okay, let's get ourselves towards the finish line here. How much hope do you have for next year? And to kind of get a little more specific, what I'm looking for from you is records, wins and losses. What is a realistic expectation for a best case scenario, worst case scenario? And let's go a little further and say, at what point does it become a failure? Like, okay, you didn't, win against this team, or you didn't meet this qualification. What are you looking for next year?
Well, so I was saying that's a really tough question, because we're so early on that what we know is with the amount of money that the Raiders have and the amount of positions they need to fill through the draft and otherwise, that this team's going to be just about unrecognizable by the time we get to next season than it is right now. So it's a very difficult proposition to try to figure out how we think they're going to match up in the NFL. But to try and answer it as best I can, I would say I'd go back to what Mark Davis said, that he needs to see progress, and if you think of it just in terms of wins and the fact that they still have a tough schedule, I think that but not as tough as last year. They would need to probably put up 5 or 6 wins for it to be called like, okay, they're moving in the right direction. They're making progress. They're by this time next year, if you think of just mathematically speaking, they could be a playoff contender by in 2016.
Now, again, looking ahead, we're starting to see some of the teams in the AFC West starting to get a little older, a little more run down. Obviously, Peyton Manning is coming towards the end of his career. There's definitely the same sort of thought process, at least starting to happen with Phillip Rivers. Kansas City, we have no idea what's going on out there year to year because it's an Andy Reid team, but the Raiders are starting to build. So can you picture in your head 3 to 5 years from now, the Raiders once again being the dominant team in this division?
If Derek Carr if he shakes off his the things that his issues as a rookie, which were his pocket presence. He would flee the pocket too quick, and he would make poor decisions, throwing to covered receivers too quickly to avoid being sacked. If he can if he can shake off those issues, because we saw in flashes that make you think, if we can give this guy some weapons,
oh, definitely,
some receivers and running and get the running game going, he could do something. He could do something special. If that comes to pass, if that is true, then absolutely. I think it all kind of revolves around him. If he doesn't do well, they're going to have to start over again at the quarterback position, and then
as it does turn out, quarterback is kind of the important position.
Yeah,
one of those. Hey, you might have heard that about the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. So, so it really revolves around his progress.
Well, I will say that we having just talked to the guys from the Redskins page, you at least can say right now you are more hopeful with your quarterback than they are with theirs, and that is definitely at least some positive to have right now, because Derek Carr definitely, as you said, has those flashes. And if he can polish it up, it is definitely cause for concern for the rest of the West out there.
Yeah, they would be the young team, the young up and coming team. While, like you said, Peyton Manning's probably got one more season in him. Phillip Rivers probably got a few more seasons. Their window's got to close at some point, you would think. So,
and even then, I mean, I am strangely down on the Chargers to the detriment of the team, I guess, in that I don't really see them having been dominant since LaDainian Tomlinson left. So,
certainly not dominant, but they always seem to be kind of hanging around. They always seem to be hanging around, and then they just can't. Then they just kind of can't get it done. They fizzle out. And sometimes it's in the first round of the playoffs. Sometimes they don't, like last year where they just didn't quite make it into the playoffs.
So, I mean,
well, at least you have the ability to look at Derek Carr and go, you know what? We're glad you're not your brother.
Yeah, well, in some ways, he's the opposite of his brother, and I think he gets that from watching. Derek Carr. David Carr stayed in the pocket too long, and I think from watching him, watching his brother get just pummeled for all those years, and he talks about it. He talks about his how much his brother would get beat up and get sacked and stuff like that. And if that's the tape you're watching all the time, you'd understand why he gets out of the pocket so quickly. He's like, I will not end up like my brother. I will not get sacked repeatedly and get my career destroyed. But that can work against him too. So that's the hope, is that, when he was coming out of college, that's what they were talking about. His big criticism was that he was scared in the pocket, that he would leave the pocket too quickly, or that he would throw too quickly and not go through his reads because he was scared of getting sacked. Now, whether he's actually scared or whether that's just in him now from watching that tape all those years, where it remains to be seen. But that's what his issue was coming out of college. He showed it again last year, so it becomes a bit of a concern. So you hope that that can change.
Well, at the very least, you've got a good amount of hope with him and something to look forward to this next year.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like we came into this and you were like, oh man, it's been so bad and everything's been so terrible. And then by the end of this, you were like, man, we could do this. And I think we almost changed your mind, and we really don't do that. We don't do that very often, nor do we do it well. So you should feel good about yourself right now.
I take a pretty even-handed approach to things. Usually I try to. Fans tend to call me negative, but that's because they're really, really positive, or they're really full of hope and stuff like that. And I'm just not that kind of guy. So, but I do recognize where there are bright spots. As far as what's happened before, I'm not one for making excuses, but I can definitely say that there are bright spots that could get brighter, and that potential is definitely there.
Well, most of our fans just like to tell us that we're idiots and we don't know anything about football, and that the read option is the new coming of Jesus or whatever. So,
we get that so much, you have no idea.
And then the NFL yeah. And then the NFL tells me I'm, saying too many horrible things, and that I'm there. They won't come out and say it so much, but the NFL has strongly implied that I'm going to hell.
The NFL has?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we are part of amateur. We're part of the amateur broadcasters group for the NFL, and one thing that we get a lot of is emails censoring Kyle. So
yeah, I say what I want.
Our handler at that part tells us what they say. You know, why would you say something like that? And Kyle's like, because I'm horrible, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, like I'm all punk rock about it. You aren't paying me. I say what I want, and then they just shake their heads and yeah. So yay, football is America. Woo.
All right. Well, hey, Levi, we actually need to wrap up here. We're pressing time here. That's of course Levi Damien at silverandblackpride.com. He is the editor-in-chief of that site. And what is your Twitter again, Levi?
At Levi Damien.
All right, awesome. And you can, of course, go there, check out the Raiders site they have there. It's great. And if you're a Raiders fan and you're not going there, then there's something wrong with you. And if you are a Raiders fan and you are going there, you're doing things right. So congratulations. So we really appreciate you coming on, of course, Levi, and thank you so much for taking the time out. I know, like you said, you get bombarded with requests, and we really appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to be here.
All right. You have a good one, Levi.
You too.